to talk about something interesting.
Alright, this is one I've been meaning to do for a long time. Maybe you're a big Maid Dragon fan, or really like K-On! Or Violet Evergarden, or something else from Kyoto Animation. Maybe you, like me, have a deep affinity for Haruhi Suzumiya, or maybe on the other side of the coin you're a Gintama stan, or you would like to say something like Konosuba is the best comedy anime of all time. Well, in both cases you'd be horribly, horribly wrong, because not only is Kyoto Animation's best show definitively, empirically, and objectively Nichijou, My Ordinary Life, but also it's the greatest comedy anime of all time. And it's come to my attention for a couple years now that maybe people don't appreciate it with the level of depth and sincerity that they really should. So in this very, very, very brief tangent here, there's a million things we could talk about in regards to the show. Let's look at how Nichijou tells a joke, and while simultaneously proving Kyoto Animation as the geniuses that they are for creating this masterpiece, we'll also kind of attack the idea that humor is indeed subjective. It's not quite as simple as that. To that end, I want to look specifically at one joke that encapsulates and best represents the way Nichijou goes about formulating its humor. Though we could very easily switch it with 50, 100 other ones from the show itself, the joke I want to look at is Yuko's exam from episode 4 of Nichijou. So I guess spoiler warning for a comedy show that doesn't really have any spoilers. And indeed spoiler warning that I'm going to be spoiling the joke for you, and if in some way explaining the humor of the situation or the mechanics by which the show elicits you laughing ruins the intrinsic experience of laughing for you, then yeah, you may want to click off. But I've never been a fan of the willing ignorance argument. And you clicked on the thumbnail, what do you expect? So first you have the setup. You have the establishing shots, the pan across the classroom, the sounds in the background of the pencils scritching. You can very easily tell that this is a test in a school. Now, the reason somebody will come at you and say humor is subjective is because it relies on inherent fundamental understandings that need to be assumed or equated with the viewer in order to get them in the mindset of the expectations that are later going to be broken. Here, all we need to understand for this joke, and part of why I love it so much, is that the only requirements the show is asking from you, the viewer, is to have understood some element of schooling and exams in that school. Primarily that you are not supposed to talk during an exam. There's some other smaller cultural stuff about a proctor giving the exam should be watching, and very, very obvious social stuff about what is allowable in a school and during a test. But it's also primal and low level that even for the 0.01% of people who have never seen a similar situation unfold or never been in it themselves, they'd kind of understand it just by social norms and what's going on and what the other characters aside from Yuko are doing in the establishing shots. Namely, not talking and looking at their test. One other crucial bit of setup is that the proctor is sleeping. We spend a good 5 or so seconds looking at the teacher sleeping, and that's so we are preempted from asking why is she allowed to do this when Mai starts getting weird with it. The first of many directing subtleties in this scene is the beautiful pan from Mio to Yuko shaking behind her. This subtly sets up the proximity that will be later used in the joke with the eraser, but it also contrasts us with what a normal student should be doing, Mio looking at her test thinking, and what Yuko is doing, which is looking to her right and shaking. So immediately the viewer is asked to wonder why Yuko is not behaving like Mio is. Already this scene is funny, and here's why. Nichijou relies entirely on the exaggeration of the characters in these situations. Yuko is the lens by which we are experiencing these hijinks, so we are to take her reactions and her feelings towards what's going on as our lens by how we should be viewing these things. And immediately seeing Yuko shivering during a test, with a direct contrast of Mio in the foreground, and with her pupils being fully realized and Yuko's in the back being exaggerated and cartoony, we are now placed in a state of not only why is Yuko doing this, but what would be to the degree that would cause Yuko to have this cartoony reaction. The punchline comes, of course, when our expectations are shattered, when we see Mai's Mai's socks on her test on her desk. All we have to know to make this funny is that it's socially inappropriate to be standing on your desk during a test in school. And because of that, we would never expect someone to be doing it. However, since we and Yuko clearly see that she is, we are shocked. And we are shocked to the degree that Yuko is, since we are focalized on her in this scene. However, the close-up on the socks is a bit of more confusion, so we have this kind of kicker joke, something that Nichijou loves to do and will actually do a couple more times in this scene. We have the kicker joke of panning up on Mai's deadpan stand as Yuko continues to have the same incredulous reaction. It's a 1-2 punch combo here. The initial shot of Mai standing on her desk with her socks, and the almost double take nature of Yuko panning up to see Mai's blank expression. Very quickly, let's pause and briefly note that a good comedy will not allow the viewer time to consider things like how Mai got to stand on her desk without making any sound. Both parts of this first joke combo take no more than 10 seconds. We follow Yuko's reactions through the rest of this, and she immediately snaps around to see if anybody else is reacting, which is a very reasonable and socially understandable thing to be doing when something absurd is going on. This reaction takes the place of dialogue in this scene, which brings up the second point of why I love this joke so much. There are no words exchanged, or what few words are used in this scene don't matter to the crux of the joke. In doing so, it becomes even more universal, even more understandable, even less subjective of a joke. I'm sure any school kid across the world who's ever taken a test would understand this, even if there were no dub or subtitles. Now let's continue breaking this down on the transition. Because Yuko is still chattering her teeth, the show gives just another few seconds of her panic, not long enough for the audience to get bored or even come down from the high of the first joke. We have another perfect comedic technique. We have a fake out. Yuko, chittering her teeth, looks up towards the ceiling after seeing Mai is now missing from her desk. The show is asking you to expect something again absurd as Yuko looks up to the ceiling, but then it doesn't happen, and then your expectations of something absurd happening are then again betrayed, which makes it even more confusing and absurd in and of itself. This is another perfect example of disconcerting timing in execution on the humor here, just like the secondary punch of the pan up on Mai was before. This is a non-hit or a negative hit to contrast with the times Nichijou does the secondary or aftershock hit. But even that doesn't last more than a split second as Yuko immediately turns around and sees Mai pull the Sistine Chapel joke. But even the Sistine Chapel joke is a two-parter. You have Yuko turn around and then have a reaction even more stronger than anything she's done before. It's completely cartoony as all the color is removed from her, not just her irises. Seeing Mai lounging on the lockers completely sends Yuko beyond repair. And again, as the focalization point, we are to understand that that is beyond even the absurdity of what Yuko could imagine when she looks up at the ceiling. And then once again, there's a kicker joke as Mai starts to move her hand, and a very good shot back on Yuko's face as she watches Mai's hand go up for the Sistine Chapel joke. It's as if the show is directing you, the viewer, now in Yuko's position, and saying, wait, there's more, and you're both sitting there staring like, oh god, what absurdity is going to come forth now? And the novelty of referencing the Sistine Chapel and the painting of the creation of man is just so unexpected of a reference that it comes across as very non sequitur and very humorous because of the randomness of it. Of course, yes, this is a cultural reference that not everybody would understand, not everybody knows that painting, so we could kind of take this down one level on the universality scale of the joke, aside from, you know, a guy getting kicked in the balls or a guy farting may be a little more universal, but I still consider the Sistine Chapel a well-known enough cultural reference that it transcends many a culture. And Yuko's reaction to this little kicker joke is another order of magnitude harder than what she did before, now with the background being lost. In addition to all colors and an intense zoom in, this is neither here nor there, but Nichijou was just dubbed in 2019 for the first time, even after it released in 2011. So I find Yuko's mouth sounds and scream here in both the English and Japanese just absolutely hilarious in and of themselves as an exasperated sound that just isn't heard or used, but still conveys all the intonation and bewilderment that the animation is showing. To Yuko's credit and to the pacing, once again, pacing. To the credit of the show, the reaction lasts as long as we would laugh at this, or the reaction here is timed with about how long we would have to take it in as viewers and consider the absurdity of the Sistine Chapel reference and everything going on with the test. Predicting that and timing that is where the true skill in the pacing comes in. There's a lot of work carried in this next little bit by the sound effects, the reads from Mio, and the little sound bubbles that don't have anything in them as Yuko slaps her back. Now, obviously, since we've been focalized on Yuko, we are under the assumption that Mio will turn around when having her back slapped, but we've forgotten the context that they're still taking this test, and that's where the next joke comes from. This is really great that they put this after 2 independent Mai gags, ton of Yuko reaction faces to those gags, and even the mental work of what Mai is referencing in her last gag. Because we've now removed ourselves from the mind space of taking a test, we are now in the mind space of figuring out Mai's bullshit, that being forcefully put back in the moment of, oh, everybody else is still taking a test, even if Yuko and Mai are off on their own diatribe, that becomes its own joke. And it gets the appropriate exaggerated reaction from Yuko in the directing with the swirls and her blank static face. There again is a secondary part of this joke that is just funny. This inversion of expectations back onto the test isn't left to hang, but instead re-emphasized with the name of the eraser, No, and even has some level of punnery to it that she's making a mistake in intentions of what the act of backslapping means. The slight visual emphasis here is on the shot of Yuko looking down at 2 No erasers, and it's a brief moment of tonally cooling off before the final and ultimate joke. Once again, we have Kyoto Animation and episode director and storyboarder Mitsuyoshi Yoneda set up Yuko's reaction exaggeration before the joke is even given, in and of itself making a beautiful little tiny absurdist quadruple take on what Yuko sees Mai doing. Just the quadruple take in and of itself being used seriously, honestly, doing 4 takes of the same head tilt is so rampantly unnecessary and silly that it really primes the viewer for taking this in a silly manner. It also emphasizes the absurdity that Yuko has to look 4 times, or that she's not even sure 4 times that this is real. And since the viewer by now is expecting some crazy absurd antic from Mai, Yuko's reaction is less hype and more utterly destroyed and unable to process Mai's hair removal joke. The more understated reaction of just the inverted color close-up and then the incredulous Yuko face and long lingering note gives a lot of time for the viewer to react. However, this reaction from the viewer, you laughing at the fact that Mai just took her hair off, gets its own kicker joke. Never let a good punchline go to waste. Or like it's a roller coaster and Kyoto Animation is taking you along and managing how bumpy your ride is and all the G-forces at every second of the joke. Because as you're laughing at Yuko's reaction to all this absurdity, the camera pans over to the principal outside reacting in exactly the same way. That even after setting up the entire time that Yuko is alone and she may be crazy and she doesn't have anybody to confirm the absurdity that she's watching, right at the end, even that gets inverted with the principal, and it implies emphasis on what just happened. And just like earlier with the No eraser joke, we are pulled back into the test taking with 2 beats. One, that time has expired as all this has happened, which in and of itself is a kicker to the bald wig joke. There's no no time to come down or establish another punchline. But then it itself has a kicker joke that Yuko hasn't finished her test. And then lest you think the kickers and the tonal management is done and over now that the joke's done and over, no, there's a third act to this. There is a kicker scene to the joke scene. After a good 8-second panoramic scenic shot, you have Mai explaining to Yuko on the roof that it was a wig. And this in and of itself inverts the expectation that we are not asked to understand how Mai is doing any of this or how she set up any of this, or that it's hitting right after we've come down off laughing about that final joke that Yuko never finished her test. And we were given time to reevaluate and then a new scene to start, but then our inverted expectations show that it's the continuation of the same scene, and we're getting one revelation about how Mai pulled off her gag. So what have we learned here? What can we dissect comedy into its constituent parts, and in doing so learn what makes things funny? Yes, the number of inversions of expectations, even away from the absurdity, once our expectations have been established towards the absurdity, come at such a rapid pace in this scene. Every joke has a kicker or even a prequel. The highs and the lows of audience expectation of reception are managed. It is a curated ride that you are being taken on along with Yuko. Furthermore, it's easily relatable and easily digestible. The humor itself comes from the expectations being inverted, not any specific references or even words. Thirdly, our reception of what's going on is informed by how we are viewing the scene, and in this scene, it being Yuko, the overstated, animated, and just absolutely beautiful reactions we see all throughout Nichijou are the way we are meant to take the absurdity of the everyday life nonsense, well, or we could say moments, that the characters experience. There are about 10,000 other things that contribute to the show of Nichijou being in my top 5 of all time, and God, I needed to make a video on this. I've wanted to make this video for so very long. If you haven't, please absolutely go watch this show. As I said, there is now an English dub available that you can go watch on Funimation. It is very good. I would highly recommend it. Particularly shoutouts to Yuko's voice actress in English, Morgan Lorey. And if you like this kind of analytical breakdown, I have tons on my channel and on my Patreon, though they are a bit more serious. Anyway, thanks for listening and talk to you next time.